The war in Ukraine escalates with Vladimir Putin now threatening again nuclear war if surrounding nations join NATO. Here now to give us some perspective is Caroline Heldman, professor of critical theory and social justice at Occidental College. Good morning, Caroline.
Good morning, Giselle.
So once again, you heard it, Putin threatening nuclear war if particularly Finland and Sweden join NATO. How serious are these threats to Europe and to the West?
Well, they're certainly serious enough that we don't want to get into World War III. I mean, obviously, Russia is a nuclear nation. And as the globe sort of sorts out in terms of who stands with dictators and who does not, Putin certainly has a massive threat element. And so he's now specifically threatened Sweden and Finland, saying that if you join NATO, as they are considering doing because of what's happening in Ukraine, that he will locate nuclear missiles near them. And so, an obvious threat. But Putin, I think, knows that that would be, that really would be an act that would mark him in history in a way that he would not want.
But the war continues to escalate regardless, and convoys right now are heading east to the Donbass region. They have this new general, Dvornikov, called the Butcher of Syria for the crimes against humanity committed there. He's now at the helm. We are finally sending, the Pentagon announcing they're sending in more aid and heavy weaponry that Zelensky has been asking for. But analysts say we've seen nothing yet, Caroline, that the brutality we are about to see is another level. What are you hearing?
Absolutely that. The experts are saying that this second stage of the war that will be fought in the east will not allow Ukraine to have the advantages that it had in the more urban areas. These are rural areas. They're flatter. They won't be able to do the hit and run, the sort of go in, do your work, and then come out. So Ukraine will be at a disadvantage. The U.S. is sending $800 billion in new supplies and resources. This is also a region that has a lot of supporters of Russia, separatists already. And so indeed, we will see a level of violence that we haven't seen, and we've already seen horrific violence that Biden, of course, is calling genocide.
Yeah, he's calling this crimes against humanity, particularly in the Mariupol area, Kharkiv. Some nations now say if this goes unchecked, that they're going to be the next targets. Are we seeing more openness at all by NATO, by the U.S., to take more aggressive action to fight Putin? And what is the danger, Caroline? I know no one wants World War III, but what's the danger if we don't act?
Well, the danger if we don't act is that it sends the message to other dictators that they can get away with this behavior. But you know, the rock and the hard place, you've just noted it, Giselle, between not wanting to escalate this into World War III and make this Russia versus the U.S. and NATO versus Russia versus Ukraine. We want to keep it and contain it there. And this does, we have stepped up. This does mean, by calling it a genocide, it means that we have an obligation to at least investigate what is happening. And it is rare for these sorts of allegations to be lobbied while a war is ongoing. And so this will help prove to the world that Putin has engaged in war crimes, which, frankly, we're just seeing enough of it with our own eyes and the footage that we're getting from Ukraine.
Here's what's astounding to so many. Most emerging nations and India holding steady are backing Putin and autocracy. French President Macron in a dead heat against a far-right candidate who has praised Putin and said she would not block a vote of France leaving the EU, the European Union. So what is this telling you about democracies around the world? Why is this happening?
Well, it's in the balance. We've seen even here in the United States that the rise of white ethno-nationalism across the globe poses a serious threat to democracy. And what happens right now is if we can stop Putin, we, meaning folks who care about democracy and countries that are dedicated to that, then it will push this threat. It will contain this threat. This is why, what's happening in Ukraine has symbolic value and importance far beyond what is just happening in that region.
Yeah. Well, turning now for a minute to national politics, the January 6th committee believes it does have enough evidence to charge former President Trump with crimes against the Constitution. What is this signal to you? You, for years now, have said this is never going to happen. The former president will not be held accountable. But now with mounting evidence, have you changed your mind?
Well, I would love accountability. I have watched too much of this unfold in the sense that it is really difficult for the Justice Department to meet the standard. It could happen. That is always a possibility. There's a lot of pressure on Merrick Garland right now to go after Trump and his aides. The evidence is there in terms of the civil investigation conducted by January 6th. And Giselle, as you know, a federal judge actually looked at this evidence and said, yes, it's more likely than not that Trump and his attorney, John Eastman, engaged in some felony offenses on that day against the U.S. government. So it is, there's certainly evidence here of this. The question is whether or not the Department of Justice breaks with tradition, breaks with history, and goes after a former president. It sets a very bad precedent, and it would also cause a lot of civil strife. So there are a lot of political variables at play that have almost nothing to do with really holding someone accountable for their felonious actions.
But in America, no one is supposed to be above the law. So we're being
That's right.
challenged in so many different ways. Caroline Heldman, as always, every Thursday, thank you very much for your insight and perspective.
Thank you, Giselle.
All right. When we come right back, Timothy Parker talks to Dodgers manager Dave Roberts. We'll be back.